Hello, everyone. This is Laura Flagg, Staff Assistant for the National Recycling Coalition. On behalf of NRC, I'd like to welcome you to the fourth webinar in the Recycler's Guide to Understanding SMM series entitled How NRC Policies and Principles Support Sustainable Materials Management. I will be providing some technical support for today's session. Please take a moment to observe your GoToWebinar control panel. Most of the functions are self-explanatory, but I'd like to draw your attention to the question sections on your control panel. During today's session, you will all be kept on mute to ensure audio quality and to minimize background noise. Should you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar dialog box. We will take 1 or 2 questions between the speakers, but we'll be holding most questions until the end of today's presentation to ensure that we end on time. Please type your questions in, along with the speaker you are directing it to, and we will read your questions out loud during the Q&A portion, time permitting. We will also make the slides available, as well as a video recording of today's webinar on the NRC website at NRC-SMM-Policy-Webinar-2015. Before we get started, I'd like to do a quick sound check. Rick, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome, Rick.
Thank you.
Stephen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, well, welcome, Stephen. And Gary, are you there as well? Gary, are you there?
We're not hearing you, Gary, so please message us in the chat box so we can make sure that you can be heard. You may need to unmute yourself. Apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. Please bear with us while we get Gary Liss on the line.
Okay, so it seems as though Gary's having a little bit of difficulties connecting to the audio. So I just would like to thank you all so much for joining this important webinar this afternoon. Gary Liss is the co-chair of the Sustainable Materials Management Summit, along with Julie Rhodes. Our goal today is to help provide a foundation of information about sustainable materials management to our membership and others in preparation for the May 12th through 13th National Sustainable Materials Management Summit, which will be held at the University of Maryland, College Park near Washington, D.C. We hope that you are all planning to join us for this event, as there is a need for diverse voices, as well as a need for an engaged community of recycling practitioners. We have over 100 SMM experts joining the summit and the beginnings of a national SMM action plan. Please join us at the summit to help bring recycling, reuse, composting, product stewardship, and other SMM strategies back to the forefront of national policy. For details, please take a look at the website, nrcrecycles.org, and go to the SMM Summit tab. We will have 2 speakers today. As a reminder, we will take all questions via the questions function. Each speaker will have 15 minutes with 1 or 2 questions between, and most questions will be held to the end to ensure that we stay on time. Now, I will welcome our first speaker. Please welcome Rick Anthony, Principal at Richard Anthony Associates and the first NRC Policy Chair. Rick will be presenting about support for SMM in 1986 National Policy on Recycling. Rick began his career in public administration in 1971 as a manager of the California State University Long Beach Recycling Center. He received an MS in Public Administration in 1974. Mr. Anthony has worked his entire career in environmental program management positions. As a manager, he wrote and then implemented solid waste plans for Fresno and San Diego counties. He has participated in developing zero waste plans as a consultant since 1998. Rick is a founder and member of the Board of Directors and the California Resource Recovery Association, the Grassroots Recycling Network, the Zero Waste International Alliance, U.S. Zero Waste Business Council, and Zero Waste San Diego. Thank you for being with us, Rick.
It's a pleasure being here. It's, doing this project sent me back a long ways, back in the 70s. What happened was that we started to, California kind of led the league in the United States in terms of the first solid waste management Act in 1974, but the Federal Act was 1976, and about 78, we had started California Resource Recovery Association in 74. By 78, we're all involved in state policy making and realizing that it's bigger than just the state of California. It was really the United States of America, and so began to talk about how do we reach out. We have telephones and snail mail. That's our way of communicating. Neil Seldman and I had a project in Michigan, and during the project, he told me about some National Science Foundation funding he had, and they would fund him for a research agenda. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, we really need a national policy agenda in recycling. Nobody's talking about it. EPA has kind of addressed it. Let's see if we can take this money and get people together. And that's actually what we did. We had these meetings in San Francisco and Washington, D.C., and put together, had recorders and basically a good list. But what was really key out of this whole thing was that we were able to identify all the recyclers, all the grassroots movement throughout the United States. And I went back to CRA, California Resource Recovery Association, and a board member and said, we need to do this. And I just got a new job being in charge of garbage for Fresno County, and I could get the county to put up the convention center and $10,000. And let's invite everybody to Fresno and put together a national recycling policy. And so we created the Committee for National Recycling Policy. And as we organized, we met up with Gary Liss and Clifford Case, and they had started the National Recycling Coalition, and it made sense for everybody to come to Fresno, all places. We even had a trip to Yosemite as part of the deal, and we formed. And 2 years later, we actually had a first NRC meeting in Colorado. Well, I jumped on the policy thing and became the vice president of policy, and a couple years with just a lot of talk. Everybody was frustrated. I had my staff actually in Fresno draft the first policy, and then we brought it, and it took 6 years. It probably took 6 years because we were bringing all kinds of new players into this national arena. We had to get used to each other. We had different styles of organizing, and it was slower with mail and having to get to meetings to actually do face-to-face. But what we did in Seattle was at that conference, we had a great draft, and I had a room where at every time slot in that conference was NRC policy, where I sat in that room, and I think I talked to 80% of the people in attendance, and I think we probably had 600 or 700 people. When we finally got to the table and read it, it was adopted by consensus. Well, we've grown a lot since 1980, and we know a lot more. And so I just want to really quickly go through this, and then I'm going to remark a little bit on each one, showing it really was about sustainable materials, and it really was about environmental protection, and it really was about coming together. We were young and we were naive, but we saw clearly that we wanted to increase the viability of waste reduction, recycling, reuse, and recovery mechanisms for resource conservation, environmental protection, and economic development. And we saw clearly that in this new democracy, and remember, it's the 70s, so we've had some experience with democracy, that there was a need for some new rules. So that we see still today. We said that we want to reduce the exploitation and disposal of limited and valuable resources, encourage waste consciousness decision. We're talking conservation. Pursue, if we don't do it, we're going to go downhill, continue degradation of our environment and weakening of this nation's competitive position. To me, today, that says zero waste is efficiency. This is what we're talking about. We talk about the secondary materials markets here because primarily a major part of the first forming of the NRC was from the recycling market guys, and they had issues about competing with virgin materials and tax benefits, and today we call that we don't want to subsidize wasting. Preserving what we have and using the recycled materials as our feedstock. So the coalition called for the affirmation of economic and social worth of waste reduction, reuse, and recycling by removing all barriers from the virgin materials and educating consumers to make waste-conscious decisions by involving everybody in that process. And essentially, we said recycling is a policy for a clean, safe, and economically healthy future. Today, we'd say emulate nature, no burn, no bury, no toxics, design the products for repair and reuse. So another issue in those days was freight rates. They were inequitable, and we said it. Tax policy's always been an issue. Tax reform wanted the policies to basically benefit recycling industries, and we felt that we recommended actually tax modifications that would address this, but not including investment tax credits, tax incentives for new applications for waste materials, purchase of secondary use tax incentives, tax bad's not goods today, maybe tax resources, not labor. A lot of these tax changes have been made. A lot more need to be made as we start to move towards this closed circle economy. I'll talk a little bit about this. NRC took a role in saying, hey, we need a national leadership for research and development technology transfer. Unfortunately, after that, we got rid of the National Science Foundation, and Superfund basically precluded the education program, and so but we called for research. We called for standardization and definitions and specifications and information on what to do with these materials. And for the most part, the Environmental Protection Agency has picked up on this. We probably want more input, but I think at least I think you can go to EPA and get a lot of the standardizations. We're still working on definitions. The recycling database, we're talking database before we even understood what the internet was all about. But the need for information, I think pretty much the EPA and the internet has taken care of. If you Google almost anything, you can get a lot of information. So we called for it. We saw the need for it. I think it's happening. Standard setting organizations, well, here's a deal. These organizations now, companies have to be consistent, and the quality has to be consistent with it, especially if they're international. So they have these standard organizations that come up and say, this is how they act. Well, they're now starting to define zero waste, and so it's important that the standards for secondary materials, diversion calculations, zero, these are concepts today that we're talking, and major standard setting organizations are looking at this. A national policy for environmental quality. NRC asked for a policy of highest priority that achieves maximum environmental quality, the use of renewable energy resources, alternative fuels, maximum materials recycling. I see this as really integrated waste management. I think we've moved beyond that, but NRC supported and endorsed, I think what's the key today, the product design for recyclability redesign. Number one issue worldwide, just back from a conference in Germany where they're talking what we got to do is redesign these products so that they fit our systems, and burning is not part of it anymore. The National Coalition also recommends that manufacturers consider reuse and recycling product design, emulate nature, no harm to the environment. These are things that are going to be very important in the next few years. Maximum enforcement of procurement laws. We fought over this about post-consumer content and definition. I think we're there. We're now talking minimum content. We think that's an effective way of doing things. The immediate establishment of enforcement of recycled product procurement. EPA is doing this. Public-private partnership, I think in this issue, it's local democracy. We're talking about being inclusive. A national policy for recycling education. Didn't get it. There's stuff happening now. Resource management degrees in California. SWANA's looking at a program for educating on zero waste. I think we finally made our point, but literally one field that we doesn't have an education or degree program is really bad. Other things we wanted buy recycle, labeling, curriculum development, recycle week, postage stamp, commercial sector education. a lot of this stuff actually is happening. We've done it. We've walked our talk. But in my mind, here's where we are now. It's really about a global. It's about the biosphere. It's about everybody on this planet. And everywhere I go on international discussions, it's all talking about the circular economy. That's not complex. We said close the loop. 3 arrows, close the loop, circular economy. When we said that in Japan, China, 10 years ago, they said, oh, my God, we would have done things differently if we had thought of that. But circular economy is on the EU. Decoupling is the next thing you hear, and it just says we have this society that we were built on over consumption and planned obsolescence that got us out of World War II. This is not good today. We need to get off the track of overconsumption, work into more sustainable kinds of cultures. And finally, it's a culture change. It's really about, it's all about the world. It's about the biosphere. It's about greenhouse gases. It's about global environmental principles. So when we get down to it, the new paradigm today, and then this is really a paradigm shift that we've seen, is all about redesign. You make your products to be repaired or recycled or compost. It's about local control because that's where we live, local democracy, and it's really about our environment, the air, the water, the land. No burn, no bury, no toxics. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. That was fantastic. And this is Gary Liss speaking. Sorry for the technical difficulties earlier. I'd just like to remind you, if you have any questions, please enter them into the questions box on the GoToWebinar page, and we'll go over those questions as they come in. So the first question is the lesson here that after 30 years we have the same challenges, different day, or is it that without sustained national policy and continued local support of programs, we cannot expect to keep these issues on the forefront?
Well, I think we know more today for sure. We said, hey, we had a lot of problems, and today we can scientifically show. I mean, they're finding bisphenol A in the Rhine drinking water in Germany. I mean, everybody's aware that these are not sinks for pollution. I mean, you can't do that. You have to redesign. And I think we have the capability today through the internet and through the websites and Skype to actually organize this change and make it happen. Gary and I have seen this happen with the Zero Waste International Alliance. Can we do it before the ice caps all melt? Boy, I want to.
I think that's a really good response, and I would just add that the progress has been palpable. More people recycle today than vote. We've made huge progress over the last 30, 40 years, but the other message is there's more to do. What we're doing is we're fundamentally trying to shift the economy to be one that is based on resource management rather than a one-way system of waste management. And I think that's really what sustainable materials management tries to emphasize, that it's all about redesigning products, packages, materials in order to have a more sustainable system overall, and tools to figure out how to accomplish all that through life cycle analysis and other tools like that that will be discussed at the summit. So now we're going to move on to the second speaker. I'd like to welcome Stephen Bentillo, Executive Director at the Recycling Certification Institute. He's current NRC Policy Co-Chair, and he's presenting on support for sustainable materials management in the current policies and principles of the National Recycling Coalition. Stephen has been involved in the recycling industry for more than 25 years. His experience covers a broad range of topics related to all aspects of the procurement and administration of solid waste and recyclables programs and services, including energy and water. In the early 2000s, he created the nation's first program that documented and certified construction and demolition material recycling facilities, and now, as Executive Director of the Recycling Certification Institute, he's implementing a national standard of certification that audits and verifies actual recovery of material. Prior to his work with RCI, Stephen was appointed by former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who oversees California's beverage container recycling program, one of the world's largest container recycling programs. He's former NRC policy chair and has served NRC in a policy capacity since 2004, and probably is one of the most knowledgeable people about all of the NRC policies that have been adopted. He has a long history of applying policies to drive and support the advancement of innovative, sustainable materials management programs. We're going to welcome Stephen Ventillo.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm waiting for the screen to change over to get up my presentation. I will say thanks again to Gary. That wasn't all a prepared statement. I detect some ad-libbing on Gary's part there in my introduction, so thank you. So Rick is a hard act to follow. Rick is a great storyteller, and when you think of the history of NRC, it in itself is a great story. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen now.
Yes, we can, Stephen.
All right, moving on then. So Rick covered a lot of areas, and it really is a broad spectrum of work that NRC has done over the years in getting to where it is today. It has a mission. The mission has changed a number of times. In quickly reviewing it, obviously you see that NRC wants to partner with everybody within who has influence really over resource management policies, programs, legislation, but basically coming up with some construct around making the American recycling system and resource management system really the most robust system possible. I will say, let me just go back to the slide here. This is somewhat of a new mission. Organizations tend to fiddle with their missions over time, and of course it reflects the past as well as where the organization wants to go. I will say that even though NRC has been engaged in sustainable materials management for its history, there is a new NRC. And NRC is trying to see how it can help its members advance sustainable materials management, designed for recycling, and address problems upstream. And we're actually calling it sustainable materials management now, but it's something that NRC has been doing since its inception. So in that regard, please, by all means, send any policy ideas and suggestions to the policy committee, and that would include Fran McPoland in Washington, D.C. Some of you might remember her as the original and first federal environmental executive appointed by President Clinton. We have John Frederick, myself, obviously, but John Frederick with the IRC Council of Governments of Pennsylvania, and then George Streckman with the city of Madison, Wisconsin. So, as Rick was covering in his presentation, and you probably were doing some reading there, you noticed a lot of areas that NRC covered, and the key areas that NRC covers, and I created a number of documents to try to summarize and capture and organize as we try to look at NRC's past and present and, of course, its future from a policy committee perspective, and where we can drive policy, where there are gaps, where there are things that we need to address and update, because, again, this NRC has been around a while. Some of these policies have also been a while and are in need of updating, but they cover some very key areas, and that would be economics, education, outreach, financing, legislation, regulation, and market development. There are 38 explicit, very specific policies in these areas. And then there's a new 39th that I'm going to mention at the end, and I hope that you guys have already heard about the 39th. So the guiding principles, the board has adopted roughly 30 principles, and those are essential in the development of sustainable materials management policies, programs, and practices. You can find these guiding principles on NRC's webpage, nrcrecycles.org, under the About. If you were to click on About, these will all pop up. But I'm going to skim over them quickly. and consider them, and have you consider them as we roll up to the Sustainable Materials Management Summit next month. But again, it covers a lot of areas. Like I said, I'm going to go through them quickly, but we're talking about sustainable environmental, energy, and economic future, not just of the United States, but as you heard from Rick, I mean, we're talking about this on a global scale. Obviously, we're focusing specifically in the United States and North America, but we understand that our policies that are sustainable materials management practices really have global implications. Recycling is a value-added activity to our community, states, and country. It creates green, well-paying jobs, boosting the domestic economy, committed to sustainability. NRC participated a couple of years ago in a not quite a hearing, but certainly was, we call it a workshop, an educational opportunity on Capitol Hill that was hosted by Senator Carper to really educate his colleagues about recycling and really link that to jobs. And it was a session about the economic impact and contributions of recycling to the markets and the jobs in the United States. More guiding principles, obviously focusing upstream on this and not looking at it from the back end on how we manage our materials and resources. It is resource management, not waste management. So it's a critical shift. It's a strategic shift away from our past strategies. And thinking about this, we used to think that things went away. And acknowledging that they don't actually go away, it makes sense now to think of them as resources, since they're going to be with us for the foreseeable future. Recycling is not disposal. Thermal combustion is not recycling. And recycling programs, of course, need to be designed to minimize contamination, consideration of the upstream users, obviously focusing on markets and looking at highest and best use of these materials. They are substitutes for virgin materials. Some of these might seem pithy statements. You've heard them before. You've got them in your own policy documents, possibly. But again, these are essential elements in guiding principles for NRC and for developing sustainable materials management programs and policies. It's a shared responsibility requiring citizen engagement. So obviously NRC is looking far and wide and wants to have as many folks engaged in this dialogue as possible to have maximum impact. As I said, it requires collaboration of all stakeholders, recycling infrastructure, retailers, and all levels of government. So the recycling programs have to be accessible and convenient for all residential, business, and institutional settings. The recycling goals have got to be clear, achievable, and measurable, and that's one of the key elements that I've noticed over time as we begin to set numbers or targets. We don't necessarily track how well we implement our programs, just we measure the output, but we don't necessarily measure the inputs, and that's one of the areas that we need to start tracking better, as well as how we define the materials, and we'll get to that toward the end of my presentation, because we tend to call everything, at least folks in the industry tend to call everything recycling, and we know that not everything is recycling. There are different places for it in a waste management hierarchy. But a successful recycling policy and programs is accurate and unbiased information. So clearly we need good data, we need good data, and we need to analyze the data to see how we're performing and how we can do better. Stakeholders should develop a uniform system for measuring discharge, recycling, and composting and waste disposal. A system of standardization is really important in being able to measure and talk about things in similar terms. I know that the NRC has a great national standards program as it relates to education and certification, so this is something exciting that NRC has been advancing now for a while. Again, looking at customized achievable recovery goals, we learn as we go, we fine-tune as we go, and we continue to advance sustainable materials management. So, recycling stakeholders should support development and dissemination of sound, scientifically based and balanced education material that inform citizens on the need for recycling, engage consumers in the recycling process. We do know that as we put more information out there tends to be conflicting information. And again, we need to use sound science and data and do our darndest to make sure that everybody understands what that is, what those numbers mean, how the policies drive this, and moving it forward. Looking for design for recycling and, of course, minimizing environmental impacts in our products. Manufacturers should develop and support programs that optimize recovery of recyclable materials. Looking at environmental claims and labeling programs, they need to be accurate, forceful, and useful for consumers. Again, we obviously want to keep our eyes on greenwashing, and this is a part of the standardization, this is part of the certification process, and this is part of making sure that accurate information is getting out there about recycling and about the recovery of resources. Sustainable and equitable economic policies are necessary in driving this as well. The management of options of waste disposal has got to be transparent to everybody. Everybody needs to understand what it is and how it relates to resource appreciation, energy savings, and environmental impact. You've seen the word government pop up in here a number of times. We know government plays a crucial role in this because often government is saddled with developing the resource management programs because we don't have very strong EPR policies across the United States. But in doing this, we do need to look at how we develop the programs, how we not favor virgin materials, and we favor, again, sustainable materials management as it relates to dealing with our resources in the programs that we develop in order to capture as many resources as possible. Tax policies, you saw in one of my opening slides here on legislation as well as financing. We do need, in our guiding principles, of course, some key policies around the area of finances, because we know that's we need to make sure that we have the economic drivers in place to provide the incentives to ensure that we're covering as many resources as possible and managing them well. So recovered materials have to have access to global markets. Again, we have a number of policies on markets, and this really extends from those policies. We do need to ensure that we're taking care of the markets, or we're not going to be able to move any of our materials. People here, obviously, you've heard it so many times, probably even the bumper sticker, you say think globally, act locally, but, well, we want you to act locally, too, if you can. And the last set here in the guiding principles, taking into account regional and local differences, state and local collection policies and programs should utilize practices that optimize participation rates, cost effectiveness, direct incentives, and energy efficiency. I know, we try to look at our triple bottom line here in developing and managing programs and capturing the resources. It's particularly difficult when we're dealing with markets, we're dealing with jobs, we're dealing with tax structures and financing and other fees, trying to find the best way to maximize recovery of materials, assuming we're still dealing with materials that we're trying to capture for highest and best use, and dealing with the conflicts that arise between all of these different elements. But again, trying to maximize recovery and sustainable materials management. Local governments should have the necessary authority, sufficient means, and tools to implement successful residential, commercial, and institutional recycling programs. Again, that is really derived on one of NRC's key policy areas. And this is my last slide, and I mentioned that I would get to this earlier. Some of you know, hopefully many of you, if not all of you know, NRC has refined the recycling definition, and this was passed by the NRC board back in September of last year. But it's a very succinct statement, and it took a long time getting here because we had very, very broad participation within the industry to come up with terms that we could all agree with. And in fact, the committee and subcommittee, there was a broad committee really that dealt with this, labored over every single word. You may have read that we had William McDonough even participating in the dialogue last summer at the Resource Recycling Conference. But here it is in all its glory. Recycling is a series of activities by which material that has reached the end of its current use this process into material utilized in the production of new products. And what's important to understand about this, of course, is that it then has an impact on NRC's existing policies as well as drives the development of new policies. But this created the impetus, obviously, to come up with some other additional policy statements. So leading from this definition, NRC has, the board has approved a number of policies related to processing activities, including the degree of flexibility in meeting needs to produce recycled commodities. It addresses new technologies. It even has exclusions. So we talk about fuel and energy and use of alternative daily cover. Basically, recycling doesn't include fuel, it doesn't include energy, and it doesn't include ADC. And of course, some policies related to the benefits of recycling. So in the end, when you look at these guiding principles, when you look at the 38 policies and now the 39th policy really coming out of this recycling definition, it's easy to see that NRC has always been about sustainable materials management. It has been advancing it with various policy tools and principles that we reviewed here today. But again, I encourage you to go to NRC's webpage, click on About, take a look at those guiding principles. I believe there's 30 or roughly close to 30 of them in advance of the Sustainable Materials Management Summit. I know I sped through them pretty quickly, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. That was great, and I hope everyone listening is getting the sense that NRC has turned the corner, is working on sustainable materials management as a new direction in terms of the language, but it's all about the types of issues that NRC has worked on for many years. We have a question. This one actually came in for Stephen or Gary. How is the upcoming summit expected to take these guiding policies and principles and really positively impact our local use, recycling, and composting efforts? And as summit co-chair and moderator here, I'll respond to that first, and Stephen, you can follow up if you have any other suggestions. But I think one of the most important things to think about is how sustainable materials management can help recyclers. And once recyclers, broadly defined, agree that that's a benefit to them, the question is how can recyclers help sustainable materials management advance? The examples of help for recyclers are based on recommendations that are coming in for the summit. We've got white papers that have been submitted by many of the participants, and here are a couple of the things that are coming out of that about how sustainable materials management could help recyclers. And those include helping to find new markets and uses for difficult-to-use materials, products, and packaging, working to advance research and development to make problems with reuse, recycling, and composting more visible, and to work collaboratively with brand owners, commodity groups, and service providers to redesign for durability, reuse, recycling, and composting, creating innovative domestic markets for products, packaging, and materials by engaging more actively economic and community development leaders to partner with the reuse, recycling, and composting industry, developing more comprehensive education and training programs that highlight how much recycling contributes to sustainability and how important it is to focus upstream to redesign materials, products, and packaging to be more efficient. Paying more attention to redesigning contracts with service providers for resource management rather than waste management that reward waste avoidance and reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting, and is less profitable for continuing to waste. Improving consumer labeling that highlights how to properly participate in the reuse, recycling, and composting systems that are developed, and certification programs that include reuse, recycling, and composting criteria and goals as part of proper sustainability programs and climate change plans. So those are some examples of how we think more of a focus on sustainable materials management will help recyclers. And when I said broadly defined, I'm talking about Recyclers Plus is everyone involved in our industry, from reuse, recycling, composting, product stewardship, economic development, market development, all aspects of the industry is how NRC now views its name about recycling. It's more than just recycling. It's Recyclers Plus. It's what we're calling it in our summary of our white paper recommendations that have come in. How the recyclers can help sustainable materials management. There's some ideas that have also come in the white papers, including development of training programs for certified sustainable resource management professionals, working with NRC's Campus Council and the National Standards Certification Board, development of requirements for certified professionals to operate public and private recycling and composting facilities, and to sign reports required to government agencies and certification programs, helping to create the demand for the certified professionals training. Developing collaborations between U.S. EPA-funded pollution prevention programs that are funded all over the country to help businesses already eliminate toxicity and reduce wasting, to collaborate with them and product and packaging designers to redesign for reuse, recycling, and composting and sustainable materials management. Reestablishing the Jobs Through Recycling program in EPA with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Local governments adopting sustainable materials management goals, policies, and programs to achieve higher waste diversion to help meet local sustainability and climate change goals. State governments adopting sustainable materials management goals as a priority for their state solid waste management plans. And state and local governments working with industry together to adopt product policies, programs, labeling, and certification programs that address particular needs of difficult-to-recycle products and packaging. Stephen, I know that was a lot of content. Do you have any other comments about how the summit could apply these guiding policies and principles to positively impact our local reuse, recycling, composting efforts?
I don't know that I have any specifics on that, although it certainly will be useful to follow that as we capture, the information from the white papers and the dialogue that will follow, to incorporate into more specifics related to sustainable materials management into specific NRC policies, which will then allow us to provide a direct hand or assistance to various organizations and communities that are looking for support for their programs. And this has been a key thing for us at NRC for a number of years, and really that's being able to be responsive to NRC members and be able to respond when the need arises as it relates to various either restrictions and or resistance as it relates to advancing programs related to recycling and sustainable materials management.
Great. So clearly we have a NRC that is working towards helping to bring the voices of recycling to our nation's capital, and there'll be key people there from the U.S. EPA at the summit, including the Assistant Administrator of the Office of Solid Waste and Emergency Response, Maddie Stanislaus, and several of the top staff at EPA in that office will be attending. So we really hope that all of you are going to be joining us at that event, and I don't see any more questions coming in. So
Gary, can I give you my I'm going to be at that event as well, and
okay, go.
Just a short commentary of what I think I can get out of this. I know we all come from a lot of different places, but if we can come on common language, especially on metrics, on how we measure our recycling goals on a U.S. basis. It would, in terms of standardization, in terms of reporting, it would be huge. And I'd even take it to the second level of saying, make some definitions, just like the definition of zero waste. I think that's a discussion that needs to be started on a national basis. That's my opinion. We could talk about this for a few minutes if we have time.
You're absolutely right. One of the things that has come through the white papers that people are sending in, which are one-page summary of what they're doing in sustainable materials management and their recommendations for action, which will all be posted on the NRC website so you can read them verbatim from all the different participants. One of the key things that's coming in is this whole idea of commonality of terms, measurement standards. The EPA is rolling out a new state-by-state reporting system that is trying to standardize so we can actually understand how different states are doing compared to others. So there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done in that. And the DARF made a comment here that she's heard labeling mentioned several times, and Nina Goodrich from Green Blue will be presenting on the How to Recycle label at the upcoming summit. Again, that's about the language. You know, what can you put on products to encourage people to use the existing recycling systems, and what are the standards that you need to comply with to meet the Federal Trade Commission green marketing guidelines, so that you're not subject to lawsuits by people saying that there's fraudulent advertising going on. So there's some real important reasons why measurement, data, labeling and certification are at the forefront today, because we've got a lot of the basics done. Now we need to really refine it and make sure we're all on the same page and talking the same language, and the language will actually help define our future. Stephen and Rick, if you want to chime in response to any of that, that'd be great as well. Okay. Well, then if there's no other questions, I'm going to thank our speakers and attendees for joining today's webinar. You can review all the previous webinars in the Recycler's Guide to Understanding Sustainable Materials Management series on the website. You can also register there and join us. Everyone who's attending will be getting a seat at the table in terms of being able to submit their message in a white paper, being first to review what's coming out of the summit, which is the National Sustainable Materials Management Action Plan, is what the summit will be providing input into the creation of this National Sustainable Materials Management Action Plan. So everyone who is attending will be involved in that process as the first stage of reviewing comment on documents that will be produced after the summit. So there's still room at the table that everyone can get their seat and join us at that event. If you're not able to do it, if you can get someone from your sector, your industry, your role, your area, and make sure that your voices are heard and are part of the development of this National Sustainable Materials Management Action Plan, that would be great. With that, I'm going to close out the webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Rick and Stephen. Great job, and look forward to seeing you all in Maryland in just a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.